Can I get some more heart into it? Some more passion? Ooh. Yes, put some sizzle in it. Okay. A, right? And then W, you do like this. And then I, you just turn like this. Clap for yourselves and have a seat. I don't know if you have a copy of the afternoon program in front of you. Is anyone lacking a copy of the program? So as you can see, we have quite an interesting afternoon, but no more lectures. So here we're just having dialogues and discussion and a lot of participation. And as you have seen, a lot of gifts. Believe me, the bag is not the gift is inside the bag. So it's a surprise, yes. So we are going to start the session by inviting Nathaniel Pearson to set the scene for us.
Got my slides around. Oh, I can click. 1 second. Oh, nice. Hi, everybody. I am Nathaniel Peterson. People mostly call me Nate. I am the Vice President for Partnerships, and I manage the Agricultural and Rural Resilience portfolio at the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics here in Nairobi. And as a behavioral economist, I did lots of projects funded by lots of different people in which we were trying to optimize agribusiness models, communications, extension services, 8028 IVR in Ethiopia. And one of the problems for behavioral economists is we often walk away after we give recommendations, right? Consultants, we just leave. And after a few years of this, I started questioning my purpose in development. And to help resolve this, I started talking to the companies. How can we make sure that these things are implementable and that the insights that Busara or another consultant or a CG group member generates can be scaled? And the answer was, well, capacity, and they said all kinds of nice things, but it mostly was money. They just needed some more money to continue scaling things and to continue doing tests. And even if they had investment from someone, like an investor as an agribusiness, they might find some of the things a bit too risky, their investors, to let the agribusinesses do it. And so what they needed then was, in many cases, kind of non-dilutive capital, meaning, that's investor speak. Oh, you playing over me? Oh. Should I start again? Oh, can you not hear me? Oh, I was like, that's never been a problem in my life, so. Should I keep going? I'm gonna keep going. So what they needed then was, there's nothing better than hearing your own voice as a recording. I know. If I keep talking, will it keep repeating me? Nope, we're good. All right, I'm gonna continue. So basically what happened is, from Busara, I started kind of writing in investment and grant support into projects so that they could be extended beyond the initial mandate of the project. And as that went along, some of the, especially agribusinesses we worked with, really liked it, and sometimes their investors really liked them getting capital from other grant sources, under two conditions. The first is that it didn't take the agribusiness too far away from their primary mandate of growing their company and creating value. And two, that it was smart in the sense that it kind of came at the right time and was in the right order, kind of as they were projectizing their growth. I'll say projectized growth again later, because it's like a buzzword that I made up, and I like it. And so eventually, Busara was like, Nate, you have to take this somewhere else. You've been making investment decks and doing other things for startups. We like it, but it should be a separate company. So that is Burgeon's strategy, which is a company that kind of came out of this. So if you see me wearing two hats, I only sort of am. It's just kind of where that comes in the project cycle. So now I'm talking about trends and tensions in agribusiness funding and research. And so this is trends in terms of what people are funding, both in terms of kind of, projectizing the growth of agribusinesses, as well as the research components of those growth or learning strategies. And you'll notice the word tensions here, because sometimes there are major contradictions in the programs that major funders and other people are trying to introduce, and I'll highlight them. So I'm a bit of a partnerships provocateur, but I actually do this stuff every day with many companies that people in this room have heard of, mostly in Kenya, Nigeria, and then Ghana, Tanzania, and one in Ethiopia so far. So we'll talk about kind of topics that are being funded. Then we'll talk about the acquisition of support for both kind of the agribusinesses and researchers. And then we'll talk about some of the ways that research doesn't always link with businesses in ways that are good for businesses and make them resume COP27 and other places. And what we're seeing here is that carbon credits as revenue streams are very appealing often to investors. And they kind of fall into these three categories of reduction, protection of sinks, and removal. And there are arguments around these already that some of the ways that carbon certification is happening are rigged. They're not really grounded in the realities of the markets where they're trying to be measured. And in many cases, those two things go hand in hand. So in terms of the appeal of kind of carbon credit and carbon research for agribusinesses, especially locally founded ones working in this context, is not as appealing as everyone might think, including some of the major investors who are trying to do this in this space. Is there anyone who has any question about this? Are we following generally? It's a mixed audience. A lot of the people who are focused on research in this space like to think about adaptation, right? Adaptation is understanding how farmers are dealing with climate change that has happened, often, as a result of activities that they did not do. And the problem is that we've come up with really sophisticated ways of measuring kind of reduction, protection, removal, mitigation things, but we haven't done so well with adaptation measurement, in part because it's relatively complex, and the counterfactuals to measure adaptation are kind of complex and confusing in the sense that, how many different risks does a smallholder face, right? There are many, as we've proven in kind of Kenya, pretty horrifically over the last couple of years, and understanding if any product or service is helping people with the many risks they face requires these sort of multi-levels of measurement. And so what happens is that kind of investor returns, meaning what investors are interested in having their companies work on, and improving smallholder resilience, and where sometimes research is working, they can often be a forced match. Meaning that, we try to say, this company should want to work on this because it's improving adaptation, but then their investors are like, this in many cases is a distraction. And of course, there are amazing and phenomenal, and we can get into them, alignments of adaptation and mitigation with certain activities that companies can do. But it doesn't always happen, and that should never be assumed. Sure.
You're saying that there is this rigged and Western and so on, but have you seen any projects at smallholder farmer level that actually managed to trade?
There's an interesting answer to that question, which is yes. I have seen projects where carbon is measured and credits are issued. I've never seen them paid to farmers. And that could be just, what I have visibility on. But you even see like cooperatives or the agribusinesses being paid these things, but do they trickle down to farmers? Remains to be seen, I think. Okay, another one. So much funding is based on, I say, Western context social preferences. This is another like mildly inflammatory slide. There are a couple of things. One of them, this is putting my behavioral scientist hat on, is we have lots of assumptions about individualism in decision making. We sell people technologies as if they are independent decision makers, because oftentimes, like in our economic lives, wherever we're from, that is indeed the case. But it's not. There are really important market systems contextual factors. You know, if you're working on a new platform uptake for livestock trading in northern Nigeria, like the biggest markets there literally have kings. Like in Hausa, it's called a sarki, and like that is the emir of the market, and if that person doesn't bless that new technology, no one's preferences actually matter until that is a blessed technology product, and sometimes those things are ignored. And oftentimes funding for projects that would de-risk the uptake of these things in these contexts doesn't take this into account, and the research can actually take the partner companies that we're trying to work with or projects off target. On another one is that, you know, we've seen in this, like I have a more like relatively plant-based diet, so I'm not saying like everyone should, you know, ignore these calls for reducing methane. I'm not doing that per se. But when we're making decisions about, you know, we have to ignore, you know, insect protein development or livestock. It's nice that I'm at Ilri for this. It's really hard for people who are sitting in rainy cities like DC and London and Amsterdam and Seoul to understand that, you know, in Jigawa State in Nigeria, there's 7 straight months with no rain. No one's going to eat those crunchy vegetables, and there's not enough water for irrigation in many cases or enough infrastructure. And so it's really difficult sometimes to align funding preferences with the realities of the people and therefore the companies working on the ground, especially in Sahel regions. Which again, some of this I know sounds very obvious, but the funding landscape doesn't reflect reality right now. And then the very transformation of some of these herding communities is, if studied at all, treated as kind of a security question, not as a livelihoods kind of development and sustainability question necessarily. Again, there are exceptions to these. I'm working on a couple of the exception projects, but it's there. And as a result, I think that we'll see a huge move toward water management, even from like the venture capital and investment space, and of course the people who are funding kind of pro-social farmer adaptation projects. Brief pause. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get in now a bit to the kind of process of getting funding for firms and implementing organizations. So the people who are kind of working on the ground and expected to sustain things after our research is done. So I should have done these so I could like click through them one at a time. So grants are really excellent, and there are programs now in which there are grants for initial diligence and the evaluation of potential to scale. So there are grant programs now that start with a grant, and then they end with debt or equity investment, and people probably know some of them that I'm mentioning, like the Dutch Fund for Climate Development. There's some other ones. And in terms of their structure, they're amazing and make a lot of sense, and I've very eagerly helped many companies get involved in some of these methods or mechanisms for funding. But oftentimes in bringing together these multiple stakeholders, which in some cases could be researchers, it could be, you know, the development agencies that might be measuring adaptation, and in the end it could be FMO, right? People who are interested in making equity and debt investments. You're trying to do a diligence on these companies sometimes that are so complicated, and these numbers are real. Like I've done these things. These comparisons I'm putting up here are based on my personal experience, in which it's more difficult to get through a diligence for these things, 10 times more difficult than to get $1 million from a venture capital group who might not have the same climate adaptation and other priorities as the kind of more pro-social NGO-based funding. Does this make sense? So because of the fact that we're trying to please, kind of, I'm saying like multiple chefs, but both, you know, maybe an SNV and an FMO, if they're not perfectly aligned on what they want at the size of if they're not aligned on about the size of the company, about the impact they're creating, about how fast they should grow, they can kind of be pushed back and forth, within investment committees or between the initial partner who's doing the scoping and the investment committee, such that a year and a half goes by and there's no answers to anything. Modal, very frequent outcome. I'm sorry to say. I literally was WhatsApping people about some of these things that have been going on for months at lunch today. Same with research grants, not to quite the same extent, but it's generally harder to get a $50,000 grant to do research with a major research partner that you want to have as a sort of validation of your model. Like SIAT or something, these companies want to have you on their slide decks, right? But it generally takes longer between, doing the initial lit reviews and trying to scope out studies, figuring out sample frames and geographies and all these things, than it is to go out and talk to investors and get a $500,000 equity investment. Again, putting adaptation, especially more in the hands of VC and private equity than it is in the researchers in this room, including me, because of process complications. Are there any questions? Not yet. Anyone? Okay. All right. So the problem, especially in applying to things with researchers, and again, I have been both annoyed by this and guilty of creating it in the first place, is that you go and want to work with a private company, and we'll make them promises about the probability or the size of fundraising, about the timeline until you get money, or in the second point, the amount of time and staff costs and other things that go into even a small grant in terms of reporting and these other things. And the problem isn't so much that it's not worthwhile to companies. The problem is that it's like profoundly uncertain. You could get a grant that takes 20 hours of the founder's time. The same $50,000 grant could take 300 hours of the founder's time, literally, with 100 of that being in the scoping phase before financing comes. How do they know what to get involved in, right? These partners we want to work with. Again, both companies and implementing NGOs. And ultimately, nearly all, if you have research projects that all run perfectly on time, I would love to talk to you after this, but most of these things end up running long. And we don't give people that because we're trying to entice them to participate with us, and they can end up then feeling like they're bait and switched. And among the, you go to kind of these VC, accelerators, even the very social impact ones, there's a lot of kind of sharing and commiserating about them, what happened when they joined research projects. And people are turned off by these things that would otherwise provide research that are fundamentally critical for their models to evolve and serve their clients better. Okay, a couple more. Then I'll take questions. This is maybe the most intentionally inflammatory, but matchmaking among researchers is often opportunistic and a bit haphazard. Who's available? Who did you meet at a conference? And the companies themselves might not even know the type of researchers or the type of impact funders who they should be talking to in the first place, right? They might be doing something like, I'll take Kentes as a kind of friend and client. They right now are trying to scale by moving their products into like the US market, right? They want to get better at export. And so they think right now, or they thought until we got involved, that the primary area where they should be looking for impact funding is in job creation, especially for women, which makes a lot of sense, and no one's gonna be like, oh, absolutely not. Of course, there's a huge job creation angle here. In order to do that, Kentes is going to need to scale the coconut production of Kwale and Kalifi counties tremendously, both in terms of their own plantation and probably a nursery-based agroforestry project of the similar kind of scale to Komazo or bigger. They should be focused on agroforestry funding and going to Gatsby Foundation or something and going to ECRAF. They hadn't necessarily thought about that. And the problem is that for the most part, we're not always redirecting kind of companies who might want to work with us, especially if there's an openness to data. And I'm like maybe the most guilty of this in the room of kind of being opportunistic about finding research partners. Another problem then is that many researchers are not business people. We hadn't been strategy consultants before we became kind of climate smart agriculture people. And so our communication with these businesses, because we don't know how to talk to them in any other way, is in our language often. We're not integrating our insights with their more general strategies. And oftentimes we're not necessarily even trying to do this very well and integrate research more comprehensively. The problem is that if we kind of burn a couple of bridges with one or two important companies in a sector, it can turn a lot of people off when we in fact need to do the opposite, right? Working with a single company as a research partner restricts you to a single context or a single type of model, right? If you're trying to develop, a new type of kind of crop cut based agriculture insurance, working with seven insurance companies is much preferred to working with one, and instead it's going the other direction where they're not as willing to work, because they are actually better data providers than any of our research projects could ever be, right? We might collect data on a couple of thousand people, and it's much more rigorous. We've perhaps done RCTs. We've measured impact in a kind of more stable and validated way. But ultimately, they're going to launch products to hundreds of thousands of people via SMS, and we don't know who's taking up what. We don't know if that extension service has worked to change people to no-till. We don't really know as well as we could if we were partnering with those companies and getting their data. And finally, I gave something similar to this at UNEP like a month and a half ago. But academic writing, which is often how reports are fed back to companies who are partners, is just intensely boring, right? We bury all the leads, right? We take the core piece of information and put it in a conclusion section, and people who are not used to reading academic journals might just start at the top and read through all these methodologies and you're sampling, and honestly, how many people read papers straight through in one go? It's not the easiest thing to do. I read a lot of academic publications, and I don't read them in chronological order because I know better. And it's just the point is that there's excessive detail before you get to results, whereas a white paper, which could be kind of taken out of some of these journal articles and written up for applied audiences, could be constructed in 2 or 3 hours, and then the company can use it and scale. So there's kind of another bad deal happening in the way that we're feeding back the kind of substance of the collaboration. I kind of made this point already, I got ahead of myself, but researchers don't always understand the private partner growth strategies, and we kind of don't really always help, right? So we have to make sure that both the company is interested in something and their shareholders, their investors, are willing to, kind of allow it to happen. A lot of research collaborations get shut down not by the companies deciding it's not interesting, but by their investors saying, not right now. I don't think this is the right thing. I've been in the room for those. And then finally, we kind of need to do more of this strategic bundling of kind of products and services and technical insights. And because researchers are often focused more in silos kind of methodologically, those things don't always come together in the bundled structure that companies need to deliver to smallholders to actually change their behavior and have it happen in a sustainable way. And so by not doing appropriate collaboration on the academic side, we're kind of like leading implementing companies into rabbit holes that we probably shouldn't. Again, implying myself here. All right, so I'm summarizing this, but I think I'm probably close on time, right? Should I go to questions? Summarize away, okay. So we have to acknowledge that there are mitigation and adaptation misalignments. And especially on the kind of climate finance side, but I think researchers need to point this stuff out so people on the climate finance side stop selling stories to everyone, especially after major climate convenings. We need to help private partners by simplifying application and selection processes and sticking to timelines. Like these application processes will go 4 or 5 times longer than we told people. There'll be a 3-year window for getting an application in, and we will not get decisions for 18 months. That happens most of the time. It's very frustrating for companies. And for me. You can tell it's frustrating for me too. Clear expectations will make them more likely to apply, especially if they have investors behind them. research has to be implemented strategically, and we can't just leave that to the companies to do alone because they don't have enough understanding of what research means to do it. We need to be collaborative in the framing of research and its outputs. The funding models that require kind of more formal sharing, like making sure that stakeholders want to come to your convening or your dissemination, your share out, should be the primary objective, right? If you're trying to think of incentives for people to come and listen to your research output, I beg, look at yourself. I just got back from Nigeria. And then partners with companies, they need to kind of not just provide like this kind of semi-aligned technical assistance. It needs to be much more able to be integrated for companies to be happy. So anyway, quick ideas on the way forward. I haven't solved all these things, no one has. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Very small, quick consortium-based grants where there are multiple partners I think could be really helpful. Instead of making someone wait 6, 8, 10, 12, 18 months to find out if they're getting a $50,000 research grant, we could maybe work with a few of them at a time, accept the fact there'll be failures. There are companies that won't comply. They won't try to help their farmers, implement your advice, and that's okay. Like, it's better to be fast and keep the trust of the companies who are good and involved than it is to be perfect in our selection mechanism. And fortunately, Hannah has allowed us to convince her of that very well, and I think is maybe the star so far in my mind of doing this well at the Gates Foundation. First project assignments can be the interview process, right? I think this actually about interviewing and hiring people too, is that putting them through these crazy rigorous things, especially in this era in which they might be applying to 40 jobs or 40 applications, we have to realize that we're taking so much time away from implementing companies, especially ones that have local founders who might not be connected to Western funding agencies, is creating a really horrific dynamic in which companies are being allowed by funders to scale on this continent, and we can't ignore that fact. Then you can just scale with whoever is working out. Some partners will be great because they understand context, maybe because they understand research, because they can get other funding, who knows why. But you can find them after the project starts. It doesn't need to be for 18 months before the project starts. And then you can ask their recommendations. Many founders, at least in the agribusiness space, are very well connected to each other and know who the good other founders are who might want to work on projects. This certainly creates issues of sampling. I'm a behavioral scientist. I know what this implies. I think there are trade-offs there that make this a bit fuzzy of a thing, but I think it's worth kind of snowballing participants a bit. So this strategy kind of limits the excessive, overly detailed initial scoping on projects. That is, I think, ubiquitous for research projects, or maybe not quite, but very, very common. And it means that funders have to share in the risk they're putting on agribusinesses and other implementing NGOs, right? We try to scope all up front, and then who does that select for? Which companies are there to work with us on research at the end of the day? The ones who have no other means of getting capital. Is that who we're selecting for? Or should we be selecting for? Probably not, right? You get the most desperate companies with the kind of least alternatives, to be honest. Not always, and sometimes there are really particularly profound alignments that no company could resist. But for the most part, the ones who go for this are the ones who maybe don't have other funding options. So anyway, with that, I will take questions, and they can be as direct as you want them to be. So please, if there are any thoughts, or maybe just observations. Was I 5 minutes over or 5 minutes until?
No, well, I still have you here. We're going to make the question session more engaging.
Oh, all right.
Everyone give a round of applause for Nathaniel. He really portrayed the other side of the shoe, right? Because we all look at it from one angle, but then there are other founders, and he's really immersed into their frustration. He's really like one of them. He's not. Yes, so that was quite a good perspective to be like a provocateur, to provoke our minds to see how best can we have best application of whatever we're trying to reach. So I am going to, I see a few founders in the room. Can you raise your hand if you are a founder? If you he is your advocate. Maybe you can mention on, is it true that some of the frustration he has highlighted, or what would you also like to add on? Yes.
Was there a hand in the back?
Onion Doctor, Rehab, anyone? Just press on the mic.
I think this actually might highlight one of the problems here. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe, yes, what he has said, there's a lot of truth to do with it.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry, my name is Lucy Wangari. I'm the founder of Onion Doctor, and we work with smallholder farmers in supplying of seedlings, agronomy, and training. And Rehab is part of our partners. Wangari Farm on Fire is part of our partners and inspiration today. And yes, what he's talking about is very realistic. And better still, I think you have more frustrations than I do, so all the best.
I work with more companies.
Yes. So any more questions?
Hi, Chris Hart with ILRI. I was wondering how you've seen the investment tools and vehicles change, specifically this year, with the rising interest rates and increased inflation you know, throughout the region, and how that's changed investor, I don't know, financing and desire.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, and one that has kind of taken over my life, especially in Ghana and Nigeria. So one of the first bits is that on the diligence processes, people are like rebuilding entire models. If you're, doing some like alternative protein, for example, that you're trying to sell in Ghana, suddenly your B2B market and looking at Southeast Asia is a lot more appealing, and you're going after international investors who want to sell things in Thailand, not people who want to sell things in Ghana. So even the focus of the markets has changed dramatically for some of these companies in the sort of highest inflation and most complex places. In terms of investors, there's a lot of, let's get all the pipeline together, and then very slow, very uncertain processes, in that sometimes the investment committees themselves aren't even sure what their strategy, what their adaptation strategy is, and so they can't even answer how long diligence might take, or even what their check sizes might look like. So yeah, it's created a lot of uncertainty and actual strategic changes, and of course lots of diligence, right? You have to make business models for people, for those of you who haven't made companies, and sometimes they have to be in different currencies or with different revenue streams to look persuasive. Hannah.
One more.
Thanks, Nate. I'm Hannah with the Gates Foundation. Been working with Nate on some projects with Busara, but I have a question for you. One thing you didn't quite cover is the timing of when results are available. Mm-hmm. And I know that we've seen that as a bit of a mismatch at times when investment decisions are being made and when results are actually made available. So I was wondering if you could just speak to that a little bit of what you've observed around what data is needed at what point in time, or what type of results are needed at what point of time to inform some of those decisions?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. You make me wish I would have had a slide about it. So to Hannah's point, and what you might expect is that many times these companies, especially smaller ones, are pivoting very quickly, especially in such a dynamic, environment in terms of, drought and flood, in terms of currency fluctuations, and they want insights before we have p-values. Is the gist of it, right? They want to know things within a couple of months. They will, and you're like, well, we haven't fully evaluated this. The model's not done. We need to make sure we have all these other controls, and by the time we get them those things and have the first draft ready for publication, or you send it to them at R&R stage, that's like a year too late in many cases, sometimes more. And so helping companies understand the insights that are being generated and letting them decide on their interpretation of that data is typically preferred. But it's obviously a fine line, right? There's a reason that science works as it does, which is that you don't want people to jump to early conclusions that turn out to be false. And so generally in working with these companies, we have to give a little bit of that early perspective of, here are the risks of over-interpreting. But sometimes, in behavioral science, for example, we have a publication I'm not like a big p-value person. I'm using this for illustrative purposes. But we might have like our 0.05 goal. But really, these companies might be making a decision such that like 0.4, 0.5 is fine, actually. The company might already be making a strategic mistake. Or the company, if they're choosing to do something at random, might be at risk of doing something silly. And if we can help them improve from a coin flip, we're better off in many cases.
So Nate, thank you for that. Okay, I am going to allow you to have your seat back. Please have an applause for him for the good work. Those who still have questions, we can still keep them. We are having Knowledge Cafe coming up, so we can still add on to that, I believe. I am going to allow you to take your phone and there is a link that was sent to you. Did everyone receive a link on their email? If you do not have the link, you can be able to share this session. You can see how interesting and how eye-opening some of the discussions are here today. And this can be of much help with the communities that you work with on the ground so that they're better prepared and confident to take on the initiative. So hashtag, you can share on your status. The hashtags we are using today is Ukama Ustawi, IWMI, and strengthening initiatives in the agripreneurship ecosystem. So hashtag agripreneurship. I am going to call Dr. Inga Jacobs, Marta, and Peter Karemi to just take us back, an error on my part, to kind of set the scene, even though Nathaniel has really done an amazing job to provoke us and to make us think, oh, there is another part to this equation on strengthening. She is going to discuss on strengthening the agripreneurship ecosystem, including the barriers and the opportunities. Give a round of applause to Dr. Inga, Marta, and Peter Karemi.
Is Peter around? Okay, yeah, great. So thank you, everybody, for this. I think, Peter, you can join me over there as well. We won't speak too long because we've been speaking a lot in the morning. But my name is Inga Jacobs-Mata. I head up Ukama Ustawi, regional representative for the International Water Management Institute based in South Africa. I just want to check how many of you were not in the first session in the morning, who just came in now for this session. Okay, there are a few, yeah, all right, okay. There are a few new people in the room, and you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. This morning we focused a lot on CGIAR and what are we doing in our initiatives, sort of how we are scaling. But it was sort of a researcher to researcher kind of conversation. Whereas what we wanted to do now, before we launch this accelerator, is be kind of more externally facing, look at the agribusiness ecosystem, especially here in Kenya, and what are these opportunities and barriers, right, to scaling innovations, to accessing finance, to working with researchers, which Nathaniel so eloquently articulated as some of these barriers. And we asked Nathaniel to present because we wanted a provocative for us, right? As researchers, we wanted to be challenged as we start to have more and more of these kind of private sector engagements, more and more sort of, direct engagement, contract management with SMEs. So thank you for raising, those challenges. Let me maybe just check how many of you are from SMEs, agribusiness, private sector. Let's see, okay, a few. Any development partners? I think there are a few, right? Bill and Melinda Gates, I think there. We have some GIZ, I know. The back there from
from world neighbors.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then maybe let's see who else we have in the room. I know we have Sis Grace, so farmers, represented farmer associations, NGOs. Let's have a look. Okay. Okay. Two lone voices of representing farmers. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. You do it very well, Grace, so thank you. And of course, I know we've got many researchers here from CGIAR and elsewhere. But we're trying under this regional initiative, building, of course, on some of the other projects that we have had in the past, to look at how do we foster, improve our acceleration efforts with agribusiness, specifically in this domain of sustainable intensification and diversification of maize-mixed systems. But as Nathaniel said, it's not always easy. Sometimes we sort of, for these $50,000 grants, there is a lot of administrative burden that we place on SMEs, and so how do we improve that situation? And of course, we have our partner TwoScale that is very used to engaging with agribusinesses, and that's why we do that, to also help us better engage, more seamlessly engage with SMEs. So Peter, thank you. I'll hand it over to you to say a few words.
Thank you, Hinga. I don't know whether I have to say much because Nathaniel already summarized it up. When you're talking about scaling, he has said, my actual takeaway is that scale up with the best partners. Scale up with the best partners. Because as we talk about the opportunities and the challenges are there, if you work with the best partners, then you are able to assess those opportunities, and then you are able to remove the barriers that are there. Let me say a little bit about high FDC TwoScale, because I coordinate the financial inclusion activities for high FDC TwoScale. And when we're having breaks, and even where I'm seated, a number of colleagues, they are asking, high FDC TwoScale, so can you clarify this? And HIFDC is a public international organization that supports smallholder farmers to increase productivity and generate economic profits. And the way they do it looking at both the input and output markets. And HIFDC is a science-based organization, but we have a TwoScale, the program. And TwoScale manages the agri-businesses, the private sector. And the way we do it in TwoScale is that we work through inclusive business champions. These are either produce organizations or SMEs. And these are only produce organizations or SMEs that are offering the farmers a market, or they are trading with farmers. And when they are doing this, they are adding value to the agricultural products or commodities that then we take them to the BOP markets or the BOP consumers. And that's how we create this kind of an ecosystem where then there is both pull on a production and the other hand on the output where they are consumers. And we do this looking at 4 key areas. And these are improve access to nutritious food for millions of consumers in developing world, improve the livelihood of smallholder farmers. And when you're talking about livelihood of smallholder farmers, my colleague in the morning mentioned that we have an affirmative action that we target 50% of women-led SMEs or businesses, and we look at innovations that are really including 40% of the youth. And we work through development, businesses that are quite inclusive, so that we are able to implement the innovations in those businesses. You cannot take innovations to scale if you're not working with the right partners. And finally, what we do, we scale the public-private partnerships, driving inclusive business. So entirely, that's what we do with TwoScale. And the organizations that are behind the TwoScale is HIFDC, we have SNV, and bottom of innovation, bottom of the pyramid innovation center. And these organizations that are bringing a lot of experiences on the table. And today, as you're talking about scaling, I could see the organizations that are represented here. More or less, it's not by default that you're here. It's more or less by design, because you have to take these innovations to scale. That is why, otherwise, you are participating in this launch of this program, Ukama Ustawi, and then you are the right partner to scale these innovations. Thank you, Dr. Inga.
Thank you so much. Wangari, Farmer on Fire, over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Mr. Peter, having the right partnerships is the right thing, right? And I think that's what we can say about CGIR, is that it is an institution that is very committed to ensuring that support comes from all angles, and we can be able to work together. I want us to do an exercise. This time, you can do it while seated, but it would be easier if you're closer to your neighbor. To show the essence of Ukama Ustawi, I want us to portray this sentence. Are we listening? I want your right hand to touch a right elbow. I want your right hand to touch a right elbow. Yeah? Yes. Yes, so that's correct. You are very right. This is even better. They have a triangle going. Amazing. Yes, we need this picture. So the more the web, the better. Yes, come on. Love on someone. Get some elbows. Let's do this. Yes, I love that picture. Yes. Yes. Great. Can I have the room back? Hello. Yes. So that is the essence of Ukama Ustawi. If you tried to collaborate, because we all like using these words, but then when you come to the ground, that's when you really understand that you actually have to make those adjustments. You have to, accommodate, because you're trying to achieve synergy. Klate, please sit down. Okay. We are going to go into the next session with Brighter Bridges, Report and Knowledge Cafe with Joshua Murima.
Thank you so much, Wangari, the Farmer on Fire. But in the spirit of collaboration, I am standing before you to share some findings from a brand new report that was a product of a partnership with CGIR Ukama Ustawi Package 3. But my name is Joshua Murima, in short, and I come from Brighter. And Brighter Bridges is a market intelligence provider, really, that is trying to build a knowledge infrastructure to paint positive narratives about the forgotten economies, right? So we are trying to move away from the gory narratives of, young kids with pot bellies, malnourished in the middle of Turkana, but, using the work that innovators and entrepreneurs are doing to showcase the growth and leapfrog the development challenges that Africa and emerging markets broadly have been facing. Now, we are 4 years old. we're actually celebrating our 4th birthday next week, so we're very happy. And I join you today with my colleague Aziza, who will probably be speaking to you later tomorrow. But Brighter is behind quite a number of publications that essentially work to build this knowledge infrastructure. We're also behind what we see to be the most comprehensive visual libraries, comprising of maps, visual reports, infographics that provide digestible knowledge and information and data for use by ecosystem players. We recently launched a platform called Brighter Intelligence that essentially democratizes access to data and information. So feel free to just hop on the platform and use it for your own research. But today's occasion is made possible due to this collaboration and the launch of the Agribusiness Ecosystem in East and Southern Africa report. Now, this report is essentially a market assessment of the agribusiness ecosystem in 9 countries in East Africa and Southern Africa, excluding South Africa. And it counts the contribution of quite a number of ecosystem players, ranging from large agribusiness corporates, the likes of OCP, to advisors, consultants, management consultants, development consultants, investors, DFIs, VCs, fund managers, and agribusinesses and agritechs. Now, just to set the scene, it's almost now like a song that agriculture in Africa is perhaps the biggest industry, right, in terms of just GDP contribution, more than 30% regionally, creates the majority of the employment. And if you look at rural economies, it's kind of the main thing that drives rural economies. But despite all this and the common understanding on the need and importance of agriculture, we see quite a number of challenges, right? We count more than 300 million Africans who go hungry. Recent news about droughts and floods, etc. And the climate effects of agriculture, right? So how can we adopt ecosystem approaches, right? Collaborative approaches in that manner to actually leapfrog these challenges in agri? Now, just before we dive deep into the landscape of the ecosystem, I just want to lay the base by just visualizing how the financing landscape is currently, right? So there is a 65 billion annual funding gap that is actually needed to sort of optimize the agri space. But we count close to or more than 570 million in terms of disclosed investments that have been made into agri, right, since 2015 to date, right? So that's basically peanuts, right? And that's 10% of the funding that has gone into the digital and sort of green sectors in Africa, right? And 97% of this 570 million has gone into 10 companies, 10 large companies, right? So there is a big problem. And just diving deep into these financing numbers, so there seems to be an overwhelming interest of investors and funders generally, towards fertilizers and inputs, sort of spaces that operate within what we will call upstream production sources within the agriculture value chains, right? Fertilizer and inputs, market information, and supply chain, right? Then there also seems to be interest on the enabler front, right? So business models that are, really trying to help other agribusinesses grow in terms of just linkages, access to markets, etc. And in terms of stages, there is a substantial gap in terms of just interest and activity at the earliest of stages, right? So there is limited angel, small ticket size investments in agri, right? And the majority of activity in terms of deployment of capital is at the incubator accelerator level. But the size of these tickets made by enablers, by incubators and hubs generally are small, right? So how can we actually drive a much more bigger approach in terms of just resuscitating the agri-tech investment or rather the agriculture investment landscape by looking at holistic investment strategies and structures, right? The larger majority of the investors that we track are equity investors, right? Followed by debt and convertibles and a bit of grants from the donor and philanthropic communities. This is not really unique to the agriculture and agribusiness space, but we find that there is a gender financing gap, right? The larger majority of agribusiness companies that get funded are run by all-male teams or all-male co-founders, right? Only 18% goes to all-female co-founders, and marginal percentage actually goes to mixed teams, right? And this is both by the volume of deals and the number of deals, right? So in both instances, activity-wise, volume-wise, there is this gender financing gap. Now, we count more than 1,000 stakeholders, but these stakeholders, for the purpose of this report and research, we limited them to agribusinesses, much more broadly. That will include sort of the traditional SME agribusinesses and agritechs that are more digital and technology driven. We also count more than 170 agriculture funding partners. So this includes the donors, VCs, fund managers, etc. And more than 270 agriculture corporates. And as we'll see later, these are typically large-scale entities, right, that operate within several value chains. And finally, more than 200 hubs and ecosystem enablers, ESOs in short. Now, with the first, what we see is that the larger majority of the agribusinesses and agritechs are based in Kenya, then followed by Zimbabwe, Uganda. See far much less within these other countries in the East Africa, Southern Africa corridor. In terms operation-wise, food production is sort of the leader in a product lens perspective. Then we see a lot of online marketplaces. Livestock and agriculture supply chain seems to also be one of the key products lines and subsectors within these agribusinesses and agritechs. And the challenges and support needs are not that foreign to us, right? One, we hear from most investors that the larger majority of the pipeline that they get is not really investment ready, right? So then there needs to be sort of work that needs to be done to prepare these, startups or agribusinesses for investment, right? Number two, access to markets in the sense that, access to users in the sense that quite a number of the typical smallholder farmers don't really either understand or appreciate the use of new technologies in their operations, right? And, talking about just climate smart agriculture, this is also foreign to most of the entrepreneurs and founders, right? In terms of just the technical capacity and also impact measurement and tracking. Then looking at the funding partners, DFIs, VCs, etc., we find that most of them are actually located or found in the US and in Europe. So there's a limited number of local fund managers who are based within this Eastern and South African corridor, right? And the larger majority of these funding partners are actually impact-oriented, right? So impact investors, DFIs, nonprofits. So there's limited pure commercial sort of funding that actually goes to agribusinesses in this belt. In terms of the challenges as well, we see that the funders also need support and training in terms of just new technologies that come with regards to agribusiness, right? So looking at climate-smart agriculture, right? How to evaluate for it. So technical understanding of these spaces. Then number two, also strategies on how to manage the risk that is involved in investing in agribusiness in this corridor, right? Then just going back to the agriculture corporates who are typically larger, they follow a similar trajectory to agribusinesses in the sense that in terms of presence, of course, largely based in Kenya, Uganda, Zimbabwe, but we see more activity within the large-scale farming, spaces, retail, be it agrovets or seed production, input production, et cetera, and processing, right? And in terms of the challenges and support needs, we see a general interest to actually get involved into earlier stages within the agribusiness supply chain, right? Either by investing and financing smaller agribusinesses, but that capacity is not there, right? They are also unable to much more effectively reach smallholder farmers, right? And typically this calls for partnerships with smaller agribusinesses and startups that have a better reach to smallholder farmers, right? Then, finally, as part of this stakeholder base, ESOs and enterprise support organizations. What's interesting is that we see that ESOs also need to be enabled, right? The enterprise supporters also need to be supported. And in terms of just their nature and shape, we see less short-term. We actually see less short-term, enterprise support intervention by the name of hackathons and agri competitions, and a lot more concentration around incubators, accelerators, donors who also finance most of these ESO operations. Challenges-wise, what we actually gather from ESOs is that most of the program is actually tied to donor expectation and kind of donor structures, right? So once that money dries up, then their resulting cohorts are also left sort of in limbo, right? Again, ESOs also need to be supported in terms of just technical capacity in skills and network. We also see that there is a misalignment between government priorities and policy in agri and what they usually support entrepreneurs with, right? So for example, right now in Kenya, this common talk about GMOs, etc. So how do you actually empower your cohorts appropriately to deal with these, policy and regulatory shocks? Then how do we then get to harness all these different contributions and values that can be realized from the different ecosystem stakeholders, right? So what we see is that, of course, agribusinesses and agritechs, what they bring in is typically revenues, either to their funding partners or their ESOs who supported them, or the agriculture corporations who work with them. Funding partners typically bring in funding to the equation. ESOs bring in training and that technical expertise to support startups and agribusinesses. Then agricultural corporates bring in that large-scale technical expertise to help agribusinesses actually start and scale their operations. So how can we create a win-win between all these stakeholders? And I'll actually leave this to the room because we don't think that we have all the answers. But there's definitely room for partnerships and collaborations between all these ecosystem stakeholders to drive a much more sustainable and scalable story about African innovators. Yeah, and that should be the end of my presentation. So I invite Pongari back, but we can talk about some of the recommendations as part of the questions that you might be having. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's have a look. Of course. Please don't go. I think he really has a quite deep understanding of the financial scenario, and I think everyone in this room would benefit from what he is talking about. And I think for me, my takeaway was founders also need capacity building. That was interesting for me because we only think the participants and the people on the ground are the one who mostly need it. But apparently even the people coming up with the programs and designing the program also can need some of that support as well. So that's interesting. I'd like to hear more about that. So we will be taking a few questions and then we will head out to our tea break. Our tea break has an assignment of networking as much as possible. So make sure you carry your business card. There will be prizes for the most popular person. So get chatting. That's the assignment. But for now, we can take a question or two for Brighter Bridges.
Yes, please, Evan.
Yeah, thanks for a great presentation. And actually, it's a similar question that I was going to ask Nate earlier. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the challenge of ticket size, for one, in that investors we often hear are looking for the bigger investments, say 5 million or above. And how do you rectify that? And then similar but related, and you were mentioning, I forget, it's something like 90% of the funding went to 10 companies or something like this.
Yeah.
There's sort of these investor darlings, and even Nate, I know we chatted a little bit about this at one time, but you had some insight, I thought, or some thoughts on sort of when investment comes in, it can attract other investment just because somebody's already done it, the kind of the crowding in, but it doesn't necessarily mean maybe, it's just because others have invested it's coming in, but are really the fundamentals there for that investment. So do you have thoughts on that, on both the ticket size as well as sort of how investment goes to only certain companies and whether that's a good thing or not?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that question. So on the first around ticket size, I don't think investors are necessarily wrong for going after the big ticket sort of deals. This is because the smaller ticket size deals are actually expensive to execute, right? Paying consultants, paying lawyers. So deploying 50K, might be a big challenge. But just to solve for that, we've been seeing trends of much more smaller investment structures, in the sense angel syndicates that use, for example, standardized documentation, right? So that dramatically slices down the cost of executing these smaller deals, right? Number two, how to sort of catalyze small ticket investment. I think it will be good to equip incubators and accelerators, because they're the ones that typically interact with these ventures at the earliest of stages, right? So if you're able to deploy capital, de-risk capital at that stage, then have other investor structures who are more willing and have a better appetite for the large deals, then that will typically work. The second question, sorry,
Well, it was maybe if Nate, if you have any thoughts on this too,
Sure,
but
yeah.
basically investment often come into the same companies over and over, and that they get attractive, but maybe, that may not be a good thing.
Good question. So at Brighter, we actually count more than 7,000 companies, but only 1,000 of these are funded, right? We see perceived risk that comes out of either scarce knowledge or just inaccessible knowledge, right? The reality is that most of the funding that comes to Africa startups comes from the US and Europe, and they rely on the viability of knowledge and data about what's happening. So seeing a Twiga, for example, or a Grow Intelligence or TechCrunch, dramatically de-risks an investment into them, right? So there is a role that needs to be played in terms of just showcasing early stage innovations, and not necessarily investments into them, but the work that they're doing and the impact that they're doing. And that's part of the work that we at Brighter anyway do. Yeah. And
Thank you for that. We're going to take a question here. Introduce yourself, ask your question.
Hello, my name is Eva Valencia, and I'm scaling coordinator in CIMET. I think also, as Evan, my question is also related to the previous one, but I think it will give more content also with what you're saying. So everyone was saying that you have to ally with the best partners, but who are they? No? And I don't know if you also in this analysis saw who could be good partners and what are their characteristics also.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just go back to the slides. So this is actually a shot at one of the most comprehensive mappings of these stakeholders, right? But partnerships are based on kind of specific needs of the organizations that are getting into that partnership, right? So we are not really in a position to recommend, partners, but we are able to equip you with, knowledge about who operates within what and what they sort of expect from these partnerships.
Great. One last question before we go for lunch. Remember, we are going to have a knowledge session, and we can all chime in and have a free discussion. One last one.
All right, so I just wanted to tag
Please
along.
introduce yourself.
Yes, so my name is Pedro Shilambe, working with CIAT, mainly on climate finance and de-risking digital solutions. And one thing that I wanted to tag along was to the last question that was made. I mean, I believe that one of the main themes that we have discussed this afternoon definitely is in terms of partnerships and how to build those. And I think that one thing that is very important when you're looking to bring two organizations together, independent of the type of organization that it is, whether it's a funder, research institute, or an enterprise, it's the question of strategic fit. When we're looking at what are the exact objectives, either of the research project, either of the business, or the solution that is being brought about. Now, has there been any thought brought into how to sort of identify strategic fit between partners? Because I think that would sort of bring the key to identifying what a good or best partner actually is.
Yeah, sure.
That's a super good question. I pitched something similar to Mercy or Agrifin, so people can tell them to work on it. So I think there's a big problem with partnership identification, regardless of whether it's companies and researchers, in that there's a huge incentive, as there is in like dating and stuff, to overrepresent yourself and make yourself look as attractive as possible and kind of not be upfront. So we create information asymmetries on purpose, right? And there's not really an incentive to kind of reveal where there are gaps, right? Which is why we might end up getting into research projects with people that say they work with, 40,000 farmers, but really they just have phone numbers, right? They don't have, like Shamba Shape Up, with people actually calling in and true engagement with people for real. And so creating a structure in which there's incentive for full disclosure with the promise then of matchmaking subsequently, I think is the only way for that to work. Because like the one-to-one matchmaking is, it's as rough as dating. In this Nairobi, right?
Thank you for that. I think I can add on to say we can maybe start a review system. If you have 4 X's, 4 stars, 3 stars, something like. Anyway, that's on a lighter note. I am going to give Brighter Bridges to summarize in 1 minute on your recommendations.
Yeah, thanks so much. And partnerships are definitely something that we are also keen on. So definitely, how do we move on from all these learnings and knowledge, right? How do we put it in action, right? And partnerships are one of them, right? Partnerships between these stakeholders as a start. Let's not even think about, and sorry to the smallholder farmer representative, let's not even think about the smallholder farmer market linkages. How can we start by linking the stakeholders that support the smallholder farmers first, without creating silos, without creating sort of duplication, right? But number 2, considering more investments into early stage and growth stage spaces as well within the agriculture realm. Equipping kind of the capacity of all these players in terms of just policy is very important, right? There are different policy shocks all across the continent that are different from each other, given the country that you might be in, right? And in light of these emerging themes around, climate smart agriculture, sustainability. How do we create more resilience, right? From the farmer side to also the enabler side to the investor side, how do we equip them with the requisite capacity and expertise to either review and support these entities? Then finally, inclusion. So there are no two ways around this. Inequalities are just bad, right? So how do we invest in more female-owned and operated ventures within our group, right? How do we also invest in more female fund managers who will sort of pass that on to more female-owned businesses, overcoming the biases. So those are some of the recommendations, but this report is going to be made available shortly, and happy reading. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's clap for him. I love that last point on inclusivity, and I think Ukama Ustawi and Dr. Inga is portraying that today. Physical evidence that they've put a farmer in the room. Don't give a farmer a mic. We've put a woman to moderate as well, and we've put someone who is young to represent the other side of that diversity. Before we go, before you pick your business cards, one last quiz for you guys. So what are we launching this afternoon? Anyone? Yes. Uh-huh. Awesome, awesome. Yes? I saw a hand right there. Introduce yourself. What are we launching today? For emphasis, repetition is good.
Okay, I was stretching my hand, but that's fine.
Oh.
We are launching the Food Systems Accelerator for Ukama Ustawi. For knowing our name.
Thank you for that. So the quiz is, in how many countries are we launching the Accelerator program?
4.
Anyone?
4.
Are you ready with your gift? How many countries? Stand up, introduce yourself, list them for us. No looking into your booklet, but we can start. At least we know Kenya is there, right?
Come on, Evan, part of it. How many countries are there? No, total. Okay, no, come on, no, Evan can't answer the question. No, the total number.
The total. For the
It's different. The accelerator for cohort is different to the total focus country.
So the total.
Maybe rephrase the question appropriately. I'm asking for clarity in the question. She said there are two different ones.
Yes. So Ukama Ustawi Ukama Ustawi as an initiative has a different set of countries. The accelerator that we're launching today is phase 1. That's a different set of countries. So we're asking Ukama Ustawi as an initiative, how many countries are there?
Okay, there you go. 12 it is.
12 countries. It's in the first paragraph of your booklet. You'll find it right there. And the countries are also listed, so now you know. So we can head off to lunch and into our networking session. Remember your tea. Sorry, I guess I'm still hungry. Yes. Thank you. We can head out now. If we could settle down, those who are standing, good job on the networking, but if we could sit down. So today we've been having, so today in this session, we are discussing strengthening the agripreneurship ecosystems and just having a look at the opportunities and the barriers that we might be facing or we might seeing that they might come in the future, and kind of having a disruption of how can we be prepared even in the current moment. So thank you so much. I hope your tea was good. Which was your favorite snack? The accompaniment to your tea. Which one was your, is it the carbs? Yes, anyway, so I could ask how many people got a business card? You can just raise your hand. How many people didn't carry a business card? And maybe exchanged a LinkedIn connection. Yes, so it is good to continue with those conversations, and we will have a prize winner for that as well. Yes. Before we introduce Hugh Dell, who is going to moderate the panel discussion with the teams listed, I would like to just go around the room in kind of just also try to see how this information that is being portrayed to us this afternoon and how it relates to us and how we can better customize it to our scenarios to be able to have that linkage, that stronger linkage, because we understand the gaps are there, but then how do we communicate that to be able to be more intentional to achieving our goal, which I believe is all common in the room. So we have different diverse people in the room, and I would like to hear some of their voices and some of their experiences, especially, you know, I am the queen of storytelling, the idea that you can change culture or the way of thinking through a story, through telling just your authentic, natural thing. And that is maybe what I'm looking for in this session, to kind of hear how does this information that is relayed today by Nathaniel, by Joshua, by Dr. Inga and her team, and even by Peter Kirimi from TwoScale. Yes, so I would like to have volunteers, but I want to dive in to, I had called out some of the founders in the room, but there are partners. I think I'm going to invite one of the founders who had raised his hand. I hope you're ready to give a comment on how all this ties up in your mind in terms of, because you know the mind is an interesting thing. It makes it relatable to you and to your scenario, and all the other things are of no interest to yourself. So maybe we can start with you as we look for other participants who have a diverse experience.
Yeah, so a little bit on the spot right now, but Anthony Connor for the Gates Foundation. I think just seeing everything that we've been talking about today, the Gates Foundation has been looking for a lot of different success factors, and we've been trying to wrap our head around quite often why things start to scale up and how they can. We've been in various meetings over the last 2 days beyond this as well, and it keeps coming up again and again and again that it's really about the strength of those partnerships that will make anything scale or thrive. Just seeing so much intentionality go into the types of partnerships that people are trying to do, like really putting meat on the bones now of that, has really given me a lot of hope and optimism that we're going to start cracking some of these problems.
Wow, amazing. That's quite a perspective and a very hopeful one, despite Nathaniel was like, whoa, we gotta do this, right? So it's good to hear a diverse opinion as well. I am going to invite the farmer representative in your table. Maybe you can turn on your mic and give us a comment in terms of your perspective.
Thank you very much. I think I've learned a lot from today's session. I'm surprised there are so many initiatives that are working for the farmers. And I think it is a challenge. It's unfortunate that a lot of the information has not reached most of the farmers on the ground. But as their representative, I'm sure I will try as much as I can to share with them. As far as is the somebody brighter bridges, yeah? One of the things I learned from you is that women are disproportionately disadvantaged on support as far as business is concerned. I'd wanted to know what the reason are, considering that the women, especially the small-scale holder women, are the biggest producers. And if they cannot get financial support, then it means that production is going to be affected very much more. I also reasoned to two-scale. And it's good that they are also looking at partnerships where they can lift up the producers, especially from the farm level, and along the value chain to see they can start the small-scale businesses. But I think there's also a challenge because that information is not very clear to the farmers, especially how you can access that support that will help you to build up yourself from where you are. And then on the climate change, climate smart agriculture. There have been some talks that farmers are not taking up as fast as it's required. But I don't think that is the image. The problem is that farmers do not have the luxury of space that you want to be like a laboratory where you can do the test and get the results. So they want something that has been tested and proven to work, so that they can take it up. Because, once you have undertaken the exercise and maybe you don't know what is going to come out, whether it's going to be successful or failure, then it means that if you incur a loss, who is going to take care of that? So farmers are looking for something that is already tested and proven to work, so that they can take it up as soon as it is possible. So those are some of the things that I've taken. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I think I would like to just put the spotlight back to you. How does help look like for you? In what form would you like, if it's on the climate issue, would you like funding to come up with the demo farms to test that? Would you like the other partners to do it for you and then just give you more more confident result? I would like you to give in those 4 areas how help looks like for you and the farmers that you represent.
Okay, what we would like to is to be included in the initiatives so that we can work along and see whether it will work. For example, if you're talking about, for example, like the digital climate information, when it is created, they do not talk to the farmers on the ground so that they can tell you how soon or what type of information should be related. Like somebody put it today. When you say that it will rain, now plant, it's going to rain, yeah? But then you are not told that this crop, because it takes like 6 months, then the amount of rain, the rain will be like for this period. When you tell me the information in 2 weeks, it doesn't help me, because if you told me in 2 weeks I plant and then I planted, and thereafter the rains disappear and then you are quiet, and then you tell me it's going to rain again. I've already planted. What am I supposed to do with the crop that is on the ground? Okay. So I think, and then again, we don't have facilitations, like irrigation. If we had irrigation facilities, then when you tell me that it's not going to rain, the information tells me now you can irrigate, yeah? But I don't have the irrigation facilities. So I think the information should be, it should be farmer-centered, knowing that farmers are also not harmonized. They have different challenges.
Thank you for that. So inclusion and being part of it from the start is your point. Lastly, I would like to call on 2 minutes. I see we have government. Yes, just if you could turn on your microphone and just give us your perception on the day. introduce yourself, please?
Thank you very much, Wangari. I'm Teresia Karanja, representing the PS Ministry of Agriculture. I think for the day, I have rant a lot, although I came in on behalf of the PS, but now in my right shoes as a technical officer who I am, I've learned a lot. And what I could say is that maybe the collaboration with the national institutions is what I can say maybe it's not as strong as it ought to be, because like in this meeting, even if it is for the CGIL teams, like now Kenya being the one that is hosting, it would have been good to have the national research institutions, maybe a few of the persons who are involved in the collaborative work being here. It would have to give that ROCO, just the ROCO, the way things are going. So what I have noted as a government officer now is that that collaboration with the national institutions maybe needs to be strengthened, because as the CGI teams, you are in charge of regions, and whatever you get working in one region can be upscaled to safeguard food security, even in other regions of the African continent, and your entry point is always through the national government. So it is very important to have that collaboration, so that we also build capacity of our national institutions. We also use our universities even to do a lot of this work. The students can be able to plug in as you do all the various research activities. That way we also are building the national capacity for sustainability. Otherwise, it's I found it a very informative meeting, and I'm surprised to see how much is going on in the various diverse aspects that have been presented since morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. It is good to have this perspective so that we can be able to grow together. We are going into the next session, which is the last part of the session, which is a podium discussion. I am going to invite Hugh Dahl to moderate this session on accelerating businesses and activating climate finance. He will be joined by Jan Willman from eProd Solutions, Peter Onguka from Root Capital, Melanie Keita from Melanin Capital, and Milton Lohr from Open Capital Advisors. Please put your hands together for them.
While we're at it, Jane Wanza, is she here? I got your phone. All right, awesome. Yes, if two of you could have a seat next on my left, and join me on the right side here. Awesome. Hi, how are you doing? Or should we join me on the right side here? Yeah, if that's fine. To left, to right. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Wangari. It's been a really, really interesting day so far. Thank you, Nate, and thanks to Brighter Bridges. It's been highly insightful. I've introduced myself this morning already, but for those who've joined later, my name's Hauke. I'm the scaling lead East and Southern Africa for the International Water Management Institute, and I co-lead the Food Systems Accelerator that we're launching today, together with my partner, Mercy Zulu Hume. She's not here today because she's on maternity leave, but she's the driving force behind this, and in absentia, well done to her. I know this has been very informative, and even those who've been working in the agri-entrepreneurship sector for years, who are familiar with the terminology, it's been a lot of information, and I just want to acknowledge that. But I do really want to emphasize the triple win scenario that we can really design and realize here if we execute this program correctly. Us, as researchers, we can generate knowledge on best practices for scaling, and we can scale our agricultural innovations through agribusinesses. For investors, we can provide a framework to identify pipeline for investments, and we can drive down the cost of investments. And obviously for our target group, agribusinesses, we can provide support and subsequently access to finance that is much needed in the sector, as we've seen earlier. Right. I have an amazing panel here. I'd let you introduce yourselves in a minute. I've prepared some guiding questions, but I do want to make this as interactive as possible. We have key people from the CGIAR scaling community of practice here, from outside sources, from the Nairobi ecosystem, and now is really the chance to interact. And right, so to incentivize you a little bit further, I have 5 goodie bags here. So for the first 5 questions that I ask, you'll get one of these. There's stuff inside. Great. Let me leave it at that. Yes, and from left to right, I'll give you the opportunity briefly introduce yourselves, your company, your role, what your company is providing for the ecosystem, and then we can dive into it. And just press the button here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Milton Lore, and I'm joining you from a Pan-African management consulting and strategic advisory firm called Open Capital. Our main offices are in Nairobi, but we also have staff and office presence in 6 other African countries, Uganda, Zambia, Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal. And ours is really to play a connecting role in the enterprise development ecosystem, bringing together innovative companies, investors, and development partners, all in the interest of building African economies, working across multiple sectors, including agriculture, but also, in a sense, looking to build a class of world-class, entrepreneurs and business people on the continent. Let me pause there and hand over to Jan Willem.
Okay. Thanks, Milton. Good afternoon. My name is Jan Willem van Kasteren. I'm the CEO of eProd Solutions. We offer an affordable supply chain management platform for farmer cooperatives, traders, food processors, that manages their daily operations, like farmer registration, field inspections, collections, payment, traceability, contracting, training programs, sharing agronomic advisory services, all these operations. So I think we have an interesting background for today's topic because we actually are an unexpected byproduct of an accelerator program. So I had a company in 2004 that in the meantime we sold a few years ago, but that company was working with 2-skill. It had a large number of outgrowers, about 8,000 at the coast of Kenya. And as part of the project, you probably recognize it, depending on which side of the table you sit, but NGOs can be quite demanding. So they would call you on Friday afternoon, okay, I need this report by basically immediately. And so we had it a couple of times, but we had our internal system set up, so we were quite fast in reporting, and it was so fast that it became a bit suspicious. So the 2-skill team would raise questions. How do you do that? Can you confirm that this is all correct? And like how many farmers were trained, or by age, or gender, or many whatever innovation they wanted to track. So I said, well, okay, come and see us. So, and then they saw the system. They said, well, we should actually pilot it for a couple of our partners. So we partnered it for the sorghum's partners, dairy sector, fresh vegetables. And then actually we saw that it worked well. But the system actually, it didn't even have a name. We didn't need a name for the system. It was an internal system. We didn't have a manual, of course, because we would just train people without manuals. So then it took a couple of years to really then commercialize that. And we are now, 6 years later, we are now in 20 countries. We work in more than 30 different sectors: coffee, grain, pulses, dairy, you name it. And we have about 200 clients serving about 350,000 farmers in mainly sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. red?
Not yet? Oh, fantastic. Good afternoon. So my name is Melanie Keita. I'm the CEO of Melanin Capital. Melanin Capital is actually a fintech based in Kenya, and we're a climate financing platform. So what we do is to help SMEs finance their green transition by getting access to the green equipment they need to grow their business. So we focus on three main verticals, which are green energy, green transportation and logistics, and waste management, mostly. And so far, we've been collaborating with Absa Bank in Kenya to support more than 400 SMEs as a pilot, and we expect 2,500 SMEs in 2023. And our mission is to first collect the data, not only the financial data, but also the carbon data, to make those carbon credits a bit easier than what we saw earlier, was very difficult to access. Then the second mission is to ensure that we can create the algorithm we need to assess climate risk and credit risk that is adapted to SMEs, in particular in underserved sectors. And finally, crowding different types of investments, mostly from the lending and bank sector, but slowly going into tokenization and retail investors. So that's the whole scope of what we do, and excited to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Awesome. Peter, hi.
Hello, thanks Melanie. My name is Peter Nguka. I'm here representing Root Capital. Root Capital is a social investment fund. We are based here in Nairobi, but covering the whole Africa. Our head office is in Boston, Massachusetts, and we operate in both Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So how do we do our business? We target agricultural enterprises, and most of them are in either coffee, cocoa, macadamia here in Kenya, and pulses. So in Africa, we are mostly in Ghana, Uganda, Tanzania, DRC, and Kenya, and Rwanda. So basically, how do we do it? We deploy loan, so we do debt 100%, and we also do capacity. So we are governed by 4 pathways. The first one is gender. So we look at businesses which are gender inclusive and also help them to build on that part. Second pathway is on bankability. Most of the enterprises, and as you'll see during our discussion, they're not investment ready. So we have to pump in a lot just to make them be investment ready or lending ready. So that one we call it bankability. Thirdly is the next gen. We cannot survive if we don't build the next generation to take over from us. So we are building the youths so that they can get attracted to these businesses, these enterprises. So we have an internship program we are working with, and also just giving them the jobs they like what she's doing, and a digital business intelligence. So we deploy that to the entrepreneurs who we are serving. Then finally, climate. There's a lot that's going on under climate. She's talked of carbon credit. Yeah, it's tough. It's not easy to know how to calculate it, but our approach is what you do, we work with you. Yeah, we work with partners just to make sure that whatever you are doing, it's sustainable. So those are the main pathways that we do. More we'll get as we continue. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. As you can clearly see, we have key stakeholder groups from the sector represented here. Let me just gouge the room. Are there any ad hoc questions to the panelists that have come up? Okay. Yeah, Peter, thanks a lot. Let me start with you. Root Capital has a track record of successfully investing into climate-smart agriculture and also into inclusive businesses. But try to give us like a brief and concise understanding of why is it so expensive and difficult in general for agribusinesses to access capital, and what solutions does Root Capital provide?
Well, thanks. So looking at an entrepreneur, as you've also seen here where we have the farmer representative, there's that we call the founder syndrome, which we need to work with, because it's so difficult for them to differentiate their own personal resources with the business. So it means we have to deploy trainers to work with them, to make them understand that business is business, your personal life is your personal life. So we do a lot of training So the challenges we see is that they are not investment ready. They have weak financials. Some don't even have financial statements, right? Then if now we come to the food system, it's a really disorganized, sorry to say this, value chain. Unlike coffee, cocoa, yeah, this value chain is really distorted. We have so many brokers or middlemen, right? So, and also they're not sure of which crop they want to specialize in. So it's not easy for us to kind of work with them directly without bringing them on board. And I like the Accelerator initiatives because you are able to take them through a path that redirects them to where they're supposed to be and create a sustainable business. So with this weakness that we've seen, it becomes so expensive. So for Root, what we've done, we've deployed what we call advisory services to them, where we do a gap analysis. And then we place you on an enterprise progression framework where we have a curricula that will help you to build the gaps as we go on with you. So it's always a slow and painful process, and most of them tend not to follow that process because an investor needs money now. They don't want to wait for 6 months or 3 months, right? So with this now, we kind of just let them know from the word go, and if they are in, then we'll stay with them. If they opt out, then too bad for us. Then there's the issue of the data. They don't keep their records. So even if you want to know the history, historical part of their processes, their production, they don't have that. So it's also not easy for us to kind of go back and help them to collect that. So just getting a starting point and them just understanding that we are today, since we don't have any past or historical data, this is where we are going to start from. Some of them also don't like that. And that's why I started with the entrepreneur and founder syndrome, because they'll feel like, you guy, I know this business. Why do you want me to forget this? Because I don't have data. So we try to bring that discipline in them. So we do this through partnership. So we have partners who we work with, and they're also able to deploy that technical skill that they need that we cannot provide. As we provide capital, and to their best effort, we also do grants. So we do grants in terms of giving them funding for financial, for things like accounting packages, to buy computers, to buy servers, so that whatever they are working with, at least you are able to store the data, they are able to retrieve it. For some, we even buy for them printers and scanners, because these small entrepreneurs, they need to be taken from that place. So these are the kind of solutions we are providing. So in short, it's like we do a blended finance model where we deploy both capital, grant, and invite stakeholders who are able to fill in the gaps that Root Capital alone cannot do.
Excellent. Awesome. Questions from the audience? Yes. Please also introduce yourself briefly.
Sure. My name is Lorraine Ronke. I just started a 2-year secondment here at the CGIAR. I just have a question about, how sometimes they make a distinction between so-called subsistence entrepreneurs, people who start up a business because they have to feed their family and it's a necessity thing, and growth entrepreneurs. And it hasn't got anything to do with how wealthy or well-endowed. It has to do with their intention of when they want to enter into entrepreneurship. And when I was hearing you sort of describe the advisory services, I was wondering if Root Capital makes that distinction or if it's anyone who comes regardless, because some of this hand-holding is, quite intensive. Do you make that distinction? And if you do, if you don't, do you see a difference in terms of success?
All right, thank you. Yeah, we do it, and as I stated, we do what we call a gap analysis, which enables us to be able to identify the growth stage of the business. We call it enterprise projection framework, where we have the formative, the early stage, the growth stage, then the maturity. Then after that, fate takes its place. We either go down or we continue growing. So we are able to identify that. Yeah, and as I've said, that during that, we are able to analyze. If it is formative, we know exactly what we need to deploy, because each stage needs different kind of intervention. Yeah, so again, for the subsistence, you'll find that based on our portfolio, for coffee, macadamia, cocoa, that's easier. But now when we come to the pulses, like sorghum, that's where the rubber meets the road, because they have sorghum, they have a contract from the brewery. Same, it's the white gadam, at the same time it's the red gadam. They don't know which one to consume and which one to take to the brewery. So at that point, again, is where now a choice needs to be made in terms of which other avenues do they have, which other sources of income do they have, and with the small piece of land they have, how can we help them expand it? So that is the next phase now we are going to work with, but again, not as root capital alone, but through partners who are able to deploy other resources that they need. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And I think that's a good segue into the next question I have, a little bit more assertive for Melanie. We've been having a lot of interesting discussions about this, and us as a research organization, we're positioning ourselves in this field as new entrants, right? So what do you think is the role of the development sector, and especially an organization like ours, in catalyzing private finance into climate-smart agriculture? And where would you see the value add of the Food Systems Accelerator?
Thanks, Hauke, for that question. With other actors, because when you start a business, it's the same for agri or financial services. Nobody wants to work with you because you're small and you're young and nobody is trusting you. So the first thing that we did is we wanted to finance SMEs, and especially SMEs in the agri space. So we needed a very large supply of capital. So we knocked at the door of a financial institution, private sector, big corporate called Absa Bank. When Absa saw us, they told us it's a brilliant idea. We love SMEs, we love agriculture, but we never do it. And we never do it because it's very difficult, it's very costly. Why don't you go out and go find us a government or a development finance institution that can make it less risky for us? Which is exactly what we did, because in any case, we need that contract. So we went to meet the African Guarantee Fund and tell them we have a large institution which you could work with and which you could give a guarantee up to $1.5 million, or no, was it $12 million actually? And with us, you could actually disperse large scale to SMEs and revolutionize a bit more the sector. So after a very short time of 14 months, we've managed to actually set up this partnership and work with the African Guarantee Fund that was then guaranteeing the lending to SMEs and farmers through our platform, with credits, basically. So the whole idea was then to provide credits that were unsecured, that was cheaper, and that were more accessible to those SMEs. It's not perfect, we're still going through the pilot, but it's just an example of how institutions like CGIAR can also work to make this link in the ecosystem, work with private funds like Root Capital, work with digital innovations, and also provide innovative financing that is not necessarily just grants, but these guarantees that can help more private funding to come into those businesses. Because in essence, the big issue of investors and lenders is the cost of lending or financing those SMEs, and second, the cost of risk, not getting their money back or not making their margin. So once we address those two items, then we're able to actually move forward into the sector.
Absolutely. And if I can just add a sentence or two on that, this is how we perceive ourselves as well, right? We don't only distribute grant funding, but we also have an operational budget that we provide to our service providers, management consultancies who actually go to these agribusinesses and professionalize them. And we provide a stamp of quality. As CGIAR, we provide the science-based evidence to actually say, these guys, they provide financial returns and they reach goals in climate-smart agriculture, and this is obviously something that we want to take off the balance sheet of investors, such as Root Capital and others. But congratulations on your fantastic success. That's amazing. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please. Introduce first and go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Milion from ILRE Addis office. Just a curiosity, why do you choose the big banks, not microfinances? Because the microfinances seems to have more closer relationship with agriculture and smaller farmers.
It's a very good question. I'm going to try to be very careful in the way I answer it. So first, as a fintech, very important to have this credibility of we're working with these large banks, our algorithm on credit scoring is working, our algorithm on climate score is working, because this large bank that is going through all this compliance check have approved us. So that was the first action. Second, there's also an issue of pricing when it comes to microfinance. And I'm being very careful because I don't want to say that microfinance is wrong, because it is really filling an important gap in the market, and any financing that they're doing has a humongous cost, and that's totally normal that they are making this pricing. But what we were really looking at was to decrease the cost of financing. So what was the promise of ABSA was to disburse loans at 12%, between 12 to 14%, which were much lower than what our SMEs had access to before. Like when we did a survey initially, they all borrowed between 35% to up to 94% per annum, which is really huge. And actually, when you look at all the digital lenders in the place, the minimum you're looking at is almost around 48%, because you have this whole administrative cost of like looking at the data that is missing. Then you have to disburse the money. Then you have to count whether you get your money back. If you don't get your money back, you have to then get another agency that recover. So that whole cost is put in the interest rate. And our kind of challenge is to see how we can reduce this as much as possible. And that's why I asked the questions, because I personally believe that carbon credit could play a huge role by trying to actually collect that data on CO2, and you crowd in this carbon credit that will ultimately lower your cost of financing. But that's still a pilot that we are building, and it still needs to be proven. So we hope to collaborate with research institutions to be able to do that. But that's why we are not yet in microfinance, but we are thinking about it.
Awesome. Thank you. Eric, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Bosire from a small company called AreHub. So I'm going to ask a question as a founder, of an SME. We've tried to fundraise, many times. We've sent all the pitch decks, we've sent all these, our financials and all that. But then we fail to separate between you guys and big banks, because the things you ask is more or less the same things the big banks ask. They ask of collaterals, they're asking for experience again, because, I'm a youth, so I don't expect, someone to ask for, 30, 40 years experience, and I'm just a youth. So it's the same things that you keep asking. And even the interest rate is not any different from the local banks. So we fail to understand, what's different between you and them and the local banks. Thanks.
Sure. Well, I'm sure you didn't go through Melanin Capital, but because we didn't yet disburse ourselves. But it's what would I say? So I fully understand your frustration, first of all, because I also fundraised myself, and in total we contacted 800 investors. So that's just the reality. Yes, 800 investors, a bit more than that between May and today. And then in terms of the number of different due diligences or questions, it was always pretty much like sometimes we get a question that is completely different, so you have to do the research. It takes a lot of time to respond to investors in general. And to the banks, we also raised credit from banks, and it took us around, again, 18 months. So that's the kind of timing, and we got, again, like very strong due diligence and a lot of questions. So I do really feel the frustration, and I agree that when you look at digital lenders in the Kenyan market, there's still a big there's not a huge difference between what the banks are offering and what the digital lenders are offering. difference usually is like, do you get the funding or not? Because for APSA, for example, before we came with them, the average time of getting a loan as an SME was more than a year, and then you can still be refused. So can you imagine what can happen within a year? You can actually go out of business. So that's to answer your frustration is we know there is still issues and we're still working on it, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in the sector and collaborations again to be able to solve it.
All right. Eric, is that a satisfying answer?
Yeah, thanks. Just maybe one last question. The other gentleman mentioned that sometimes when they go to do their due diligence, they find, some of these SMEs have very weak financials. So I just wanted to understand what's weak. What's the context of the weak? Yeah, how weak is weak in terms of weak financials?
If I may actually divert that question just slightly. So for us as well, we're looking at a high-risk context, purely from a macroeconomic perspective, not even looking at the SMEs. And we really want to understand, and this is a question for you, Milton, maybe, because you're working a lot on investment readiness. What does it actually mean to be investment ready in Africa as an agri-SME?
The trick question of the day. I think the simple answer is it depends. I think on one hand, it depends who is the investor. Is the investor a commercially minded investor? Is this an impact investor? Is this a bank? Is it a development agency? What sort of capital are they providing? Is it non-returnable grant funding? Is it debt? Is it equity? On the other hand, who is receiving this funding? Is it a farmer? Is it an agri-SME? And if it's an agri-SME, what is the nature of the business of this agri-SME? Where is it playing in the value chain? Is it in production? Is it an input provider? Is it a post-harvest player? So it really depends on a lot of different factors. And the answer around investment readiness may not be the same for a range of businesses or a range of investors. But I'll probably maybe provide maybe three perspectives that probably hold true irrespective of the investor, irrespective of the nature of financial investment, and irrespective of the entity that's receiving the investment. Is one, the ability to effectively absorb investment. And the reason why I raise ability to effectively absorb investment, it's one thing to receive money. It's another thing to be able to really know what to do with that money when it comes in. And so the issues around absorption capacity, even for grant funding, leave alone equity or debt, is a big question. Once this funding is absorbed, how is this going to be used? And does the entity and do the people within this entity have the capacity to be able to deploy these resources effectively? Yes, an innovative company may have brilliant researchers who are able to come up with research findings that can be commercialized. But is that researcher really able to address issues around market demand and other things? In some cases, it's possible. In other cases, maybe not so. So institutional capacity, but individual capacity as well. And in part, the reason why, I think as we think about composition of businesses, the team approach is important. And then sort of last but not least, once this investment has been absorbed, once it's been used, is there an ability to generate a return on investment? Now, for some investors, they're not looking for money back. A philanthropy or a development partner that is providing grant funding is not looking for their money back in some instances. but they want a return on that investment. That return might be impact or certain outcomes. You know, once invested in, are you able to meet those expectations and in other cases exceed them? But for the commercial investor, the ability to return a financial return on investment is important. And if that investor doesn't see this pathway, risks aside, then there'll obviously be hesitation to make this investment. And so really, investment, irrespective of who the investor is, what sort of capital they're providing, and what the destination is really all about risk perception, but in a lot of instances, risk reality. And I think as we think about investment readiness, is also wearing the shoes of the investor, and what you would do if you had the resources that they were working with. So this is a perspective, but Bonabosira, just to maybe address one question that you raised around the minefield of funders and investors. Not to necessarily make a plug for open capital, but part of the reason why organizations like ours exist as enterprise support organizations is to support businesses, to support innovators navigate through this minefield. One, how do you align and position yourself with the right funder to meet your need? Whether that funder is a provider of debt, like Root Capital, whether that's a provider of non-returnable grant funding, whether that's an equity investor. Who are they? Are they available in the local market? Are they available in the global market? And essentially work with you, ideally to shorten the timelines and the frustration that you might face, but also ensure that the right connections are being made. Because recognizing that in addition to the return on investments and all the other things I've spoken about, different funders have different timelines. Some want to get their return on investment sooner rather than later. And if you don't know this, then you could end up with a situation where you do receive investment from an investor, but you're wondering why they're seeking a return on capital sooner than you're prepared to deliver on it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Milton. And now is maybe the right time to say that Open Capital Advisors has been our partner in providing investment readiness services for an accelerator program that we're running in Zambia currently. And the project is concluding at the moment. We've participated in the Impact Investment Summit in Zambia, and we've generated some outputs. Lorna is also here, who is the project leader. Thank you so much for coming. Addressing the research audience in the room here now, bear with me for a minute. So what we've done is we have an innovation that we wanted to scale in Zambia. In this case, it was an integrated agriculture management practice. And through our sourcing process, we've identified suitable agribusinesses in the aquaculture space in Luapula province who are able to scale this innovation. Then, we've provided our climate smart agriculture advisory services, and Open Capital has done their investment readiness magic. And at the end of this, we're actually able to say, okay, what this consortium of 5 SMEs in a consolidated fashion is looking for is 140,000 in non-returned grant funding. So in this end-to-end process, which is obviously with a lot of moving parts, we're actually able to match an innovation with a price tag and a funding type, which is groundbreaking. We haven't done this before, and if we're able to repeat this process multiple times in the Food Systems Accelerator and in further cohorts, we're actually able to standardize it, at least that's our intention, to a point that we actually reduce this vagueness, the it depends factor, to a point that we say, okay, we have an innovation, we have the private sector, and we're actually able to predict to a certain extent what's needed here, right? I see a lot of cautious nodding. Okay, I have some more questions. Are there any more questions from the room so far? Evan, yes. You don't get a goodie bag though.
Good. I was struck by the 800 investors that you had to. It sounds exhausting, and you must have thick skin, because I'm sure that most of them gave a negative answer. And I'm wondering, we hear about these sort of matchmaking platforms, and so you've got like, okay, AGRF Deal Room, I've seen Africa Investment Forum, these kind of things. But I'm wondering, are those effective at all? Do you see, or is it more sort of, I guess you'd say, a boutique approach for each, investment that needs, for a company like yours or any that we're hearing here and working through maybe a Virgin Capital or an Open Capital, these kind of, and really each one kind of needs to be taken through. But I'm wondering your thoughts on these kind of matchmaking platforms. Are these more sort of, I don't know, ways to bring people together and tell nice stories, which is great, versus how much actual investment do you think come out of those for the kind of companies we're talking about here?
Maybe I can talk about, again, my experience as a founder of those matchmaking platforms. So basically, I believe that the equity investment market is based on information asymmetry, and it's based like that for a reason. That's the jobs of equity investors. So now you destroy those information asymmetry, it makes it a bit less interesting for them, I find it. I've never got an investment through a matchmaking platform, personally, but I've got to a lot of different events and different other platforms that were not just matchmaking, and then I made good connections, and those connections may lead to an investment in a year or two. The investment game, and especially the equity investment game, in my perspective, is a relationship game. I go for coffees, breakfasts, lunch, and dinners on a daily basis with different investors. And some will never invest in my company before then 2025 or 2026. But you start the relationship now because you want to get married with them in the next 4 or 5 years. And that's why I believe that it's going to be very difficult to digitize that process, because, and during COVID we tried, to be very honest. Melanin Capital, the very basic idea initially was a matchmaking between investors, because during COVID there was not this idea of meeting people and traveling and so on. But investors were telling me, I'm not going to put 500K on a guy that has just a profile, and I've never seen, and I've not seen the company, and I've not seen how they operate, and I don't see if it's even true what they're saying, and so on. So that's why we pivoted very quickly into the green lending space, and mostly doing volumes of credit instead of equity investments. But I still see a lot of startups that are trying to do this, and I think that it's a long game, and we'll see. But my experience is that, especially on the agricultural sector, which is very sensitive, where investors are a bit shy sometimes. There's very experienced investors like Fruit Capital, but that's more the exception than the rule for me. So yeah, I'm still skeptical, honestly.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so it's not easy to develop a relationship just by instant meetings. So as she said, it's something you develop over time. For me, I believe being intentional, identifying the partners who are interested with your venture is very critical. For example, we do have various conferences. Yeah, so depending on that conference, and if you are operating within that value chain, then you attend it, then you'll be able to get the right partner. Then the second part is like what he's doing. I was with him in Zambia. Yeah, so it's very important because we have everyone there, so you are also able to pitch, and the information is amplified, and everyone knows about what you are doing and how you are doing it. So for me, what I can say is just being intentional, because looking at or introducing yourself to 800 potential investors, that's quite hectic, right? So for us in the agri space, we have a Council of Smallholder Association. So we are almost 20 social investors. So if you just know one of us, then it means you've known the 26 of us. And we know that this is what I can offer, and this is not what is in my niche, and I know who can offer that. So it's just a chain that you just start with one, then you ask, if you are not able to do this, who else can do this? So the chain continues, and you are able to get your solution without now having to knock at every door, right? So that's all I can say in short.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I hope that, was satisfactory. Awesome. So also, bearing in mind that it's almost 5 p.m. and Germany is playing Japan at the moment. Let me quickly let Jan Willem address another stakeholder group. We've fallen into a little bit of a trap that one tends to fall in when participating in a development workshop. We've categorically excluded the one stakeholder group that we're doing all of this for, which is the smallholder farmer. So what I would like to know from your perspective of being the most, I guess, on the ground of us, how much digitalization, or how much of, in a very general sense, all of this can the target group, can smallholder farmers handle? How is the market reacting in its dynamic to these kind of very high level developments, and what are the best practices for you to really engage farmers into, you know, semi-formal or financial and economic value chains? It's a very broad question. Please.
Wait, it's a long question. But let me, I think, because we are an IT company in the panel are three investment firms, basically. So you would expect that we would have very different challenges as an IT company, but it's actually not the case. So we have, let's say, about 200 clients. Typically, they work with hundreds, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of farmers. So investors, they would look for a return on investment, even if it's a grant funding, they still need something in return. So we have an annual license fee. So we need to make sure the client is very happy, otherwise they don't renew. So we have three types of clients. We have what we call the bread and butter. Sometimes we get a call, they say, okay, this is what we do, can you do it? Can you help us? Yes. Send us an invoice and send your people to install it. So that's very easy. Then we have some what we call innovative partnerships. So we work with some of the largest coffee traders, cocoa traders, input suppliers in the world. And we develop some complex partnerships where, let's say, from first mile all the way up to the final consumer, there is traceability or other compliance issues. And then we have what we call public-private partnerships. Basically, these are donor-funded companies, often very weak. In general, they're all very, very weak. That is, sounds like quite a statement, but it's simply the reality. A typical client of us, if we would ask them, share us your organogram, share us your table of authority, they would, well, often they wouldn't understand the question. If you explain it, they wouldn't be able to draw it. So a lot of our work really goes into those very, very basic stuff. Because we are not introducing just an app where you can check your weather data. We are not introducing something where you can apply for a loan with a bank. We offer basically a mini SAP solution that ticks basically all the aspects in your enterprise. Now, so we really need to do a very in-depth analysis. How do you work with the farmers? How do you report? What are your stakeholders? What are your market compliance issues? So to help the companies, we actually have a large online training program about contract farming with some partners, but it's basically market systems development program. And so we as an IT company, we do basically the work that the NGOs would typically, well, would like to do. At the moment, beginning of the year, we trained 35 grain millers and traders in Kenya. Now we are training about 50 across Africa. Next year, we aim at about training 150. So for us, it's a way to get in touch with those companies. And we don't talk about eProd, we just talk about basically market systems development in general, how to build a business plan for contract farming. But the challenges are very similar. We need to build the capacity of our clients. Now, for the investment firms, I also have a question. Now, when you invest, you would like to see the books. So you expect a company to have Sage, QuickBooks, Tally, some kind of a system, even if an Excel sheet, well designed, can give you some financial accountability. So why would you not expect the same for if you invest in a company that works with outgrowers? Why would you not expect in a similar way that they have like professional ICT platforms to manage all these aspects? Yesterday I was in Kampala with a client, and they hire external people to mobilize their farmers, and they say, well, yeah, we don't have field locations, we don't have this, we don't have that. You know, yes, then of course you're basically driving in the dark. full speed. You don't know when you crash, but you know you will crash. So I would focus more as the development community. I would focus much more on supporting on the systematic the side of the companies. Everybody focuses on the easy aspects, more farmer training, more this, more that. Yes, but as an organization, well, you need to have certain systems in place, and this is very difficult. And there's many consultants that say they can do that. I have been in this field basically from different angles for the last 26 years, and I don't know many success stories. So I would be very interested to continue discussion afterwards while Japan and Germany are playing. But I'm not into football, so but I think this area is much more complicated than some of you might think.
Is that how? It's great. Okay, no, this is going to be a success story, I promise. Anyway, okay, coming to an end. Thanks a lot. I'll leave it to you, Wangari, to give some concluding remarks. I know you have a couple of logistical things to mention as well. And after that, obviously, I happily invite you to join us for the official launch. We have a big tent outside, cocktail evening, lots of free drinks and snacks. There's going to be a little bit of formal announcements. We have a video prepared and a countdown, but we really want to use the opportunity, obviously, to have all of you engage amongst yourselves and with each other to see how we can all work together on this journey. Awesome. Thank you so much. And a big round of applause for the panelists.
I'm going to put you on the spot for a question. If you could take your seats, our panelists, please give them a big hearty clap for their amazing insights. You can join the rest. Welcome. Yes. I think the first thing we've noted is how we are in good hands with Hook in this initiative. He really understands it, and he gets both sides of the farmer and the partners and the everything, and he's in the middle of it. And I hope when it's cocktail hour, he gets those back-to-back cocktails, because he's like, I finally did it, all this planning, and today is the day to start the execution phase. So I hope you will have a few glasses of wine. Yeah? Yeah, because it's been a lot of time and a lot of planning and a lot of so much going into it. And you can imagine people like partners like Melanin was portraying, people who have demands. You can imagine you're trying to go with a marriage proposal and you're saying, I would like to marry you. And then this conversation about investor readiness is very important. And as I am here, yes, I'm a farmer, but I represent over 40,000 farmers online and who are being live streamed to right now. And I think this is the main question. How do I become investor ready? How do I effectively absorb that investment and to my benefit and to scale and to impact my community? And so they're asking how, where, qualifying, and capacity. And just an idea came to me on how can we centralize this information? Can we have some kind of a website where people can find all these links or of where they can even access some of this opportunity? Just not even much, just links. You know how you find in Coursera, they're just links of courses you can find free online, something like that. Maybe that would be a first starting step, because these opportunities are there. This need is there for sure, because we are running on a deficit in terms of food supply in the country and in the continent. But then that linkage, we need to think more on that, and that is our assignment as we network during our cocktail hour. I am going to put my fellow moderator on the spot to ask, Hugh, what is the Accelerator's goal from your side in-house? Because the brochure says you want to serve millions of farmers. The idea is to impact millions of farmers at the end of this. But we have different investors who have different intentions. They want to reduce carbon. Some want to increase employment, specifically number of employment. So what are you looking for? Give us the marking scheme. What is your in-house goal for this accelerator?
Thanks. I knew I would enjoy your praises with a pinch of salt because you said you'd put me on the spot, so here it is. I mean, there's many different ways to answer what we want to get out of this. Do we want to, I mean, we have project goals, obviously. We want to facilitate 5 million in additional financing into 30 agri-SMEs by end of 2024. We have a couple of climate-smart agriculture indicators that, we use for performance and so on. But I guess, the big vision is we're not reaching the sustainable development goals, but on the other hand, paradoxically, there's a huge amount of deployable capital that's just waiting to go into high-impact opportunities in the agricultural sector in Africa, which is a strong, component, like a challenge that we have to solve in order to become sustainable as a global community. And I guess what we want to do is really provide a vehicle, a tool, a framework, call it what you want, to advise governments, development projects, other accelerators, the private sector, the finance community, whoever. We haven't decided this yet. This is the first cohort of it all. But we really want to share this knowledge and provide best practice, because we are inherently a research organization, provide a best practice on how to deliver climate-smart innovations at scale. That's
amazing. Let's give him a clap. Yes. One question. It's not question time, but I will allow a small question.
Okay, sorry to buzz in at the last minute. My name is Lucy. Again, on his question, I haven't gotten an answer to your question. What is exactly the inside information? What is your actual target with the accelerator program? Is it empowerment? Is it financing? Is it climate? Is it what is it exactly that you hope to achieve?
What are your markers?
Yes, yes, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so you can have one-on-one with him and grill him for hours as we continue. That's a very good question. I'm sure every one of us would like to know a more specific answer to that, but that's okay. I will invite Dr. Inga at some point to come and give a vote of thanks for the day. But just in summary, I would like to ask a question. Who knows the name of my brand? So you can refer us to projects of similar in terms of access to information to our farmers. Yes, we are consultants and we work with partners like yourself, but we don't come just as one. We represent more than thousands of farmers, and we can be able to be that link for you guys to advocate for campaigns in the agricultural space, mechanization, and just all these innovations towards a better future. So you can find more information on our website on www.farmeronfire.com. We have some housekeeping rules in terms of, so today you have been invited cocktail hour. I know you didn't leave a tent when you were arriving, but right now there is a huge tent just at the entrance. Please do not leave, but immediately we leave this venue, that will be the next one. So there is no transition time. We just walk straight on there. Then as of tomorrow, the venue will not be here. The venue will be at the Golden Tulip Hotel. Those who need to write it down, it's called the Golden Tulip Hotel. It is in Westlands, and the sessions will start at 9 a.m. The guests who are staying here at Ilri Hotel will be provided with a transport shuttle at 7:45, and it will leave at 8, so thank you for keeping time. Those who are making their own arrangements, let us meet at that venue and at 9 a.m. So I will now say my goodbyes. I hope you had a good time. I will also be looking out for the person with the most business cards and with the most names crammed for the day. So if I'll just be scouting around and I hear you have 12 names of people you've met today, that will be awesome. And yes, you can get a gift as well. So Dr. Inga, please come and help us finish off.
Thank you so much, Wangari, Farmer on Fire. Really interesting discussion today. I don't know how many from CGIAR felt that this was a little bit different, right? A little bit not our usual technical or policy or sort of crop improvement discussion. And that's exactly what we are trying to bridge through the Food Systems Accelerator. It's really trying to, have more of these kind of discussions in CGIAR and with science-based organizations. Coming back to the question around what is the accelerator to do, the accelerator, remember U2 is all about diversifying and sustainably intensifying maize-mixed systems. So within that, the accelerator is working or supporting businesses to scale different practices, different innovations. And we do it through 3 cohorts, each with a different theme or themes. It might be mechanization, it might be irrigation, it might be digital agriculture, right? So there will be 3 cohorts, each with slightly different themes that SMEs can respond to. Main thing is they need to scale. So they need to show us and tell us how they can reach these many beneficiaries, basically. And then, of course, it's the scaling grant that's provided and the technical assistance. But there'll be much more said about that at our cocktail hour. So we really want to thank you all, please, and we invite you all now to the cocktail. Actually, there's 2 tents, Wangari, so you have to look beyond the first tent and go further to the big tent. So it's really sort of right by the reception area, and we welcome you. And that's where we're going to sort of do a countdown and actually launch this accelerator. It's going live, so everybody joining online, go to vc4a.com. That's where the call will be loaded. We'll share the links as well. And we hope to get as many applications. And Wangari, we're looking to you, and also the following. We're looking to Grace, all the other partners that have access to networks to really sort of get the word out and build the enthusiasm for this accelerator, which we find so exciting. But I really just want to say thank you, Hauke, thank you, Mercy, whoever Mercy is, for the wonderful work that you've done so far. We've finally gotten to the stage of launching this accelerator. To the 2Scale team, Peter, Salome, everyone we look forward to working with you. This is the start of our journey. And so many other partners that have sort of come along with us, Brighter Bridges, OCA. We hope we don't sort of stop the partnership, but continue now with all these different cohorts. What did we say in our video? If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And we are really in it for the long run, in it to win it. So yes, let's continue the discussions at the cocktail hour. Thank you so much, everyone. Oh, and the video.
We're here at day 2 of the Zambian Impact Investment Summit, and we brought our accelerator along, our high-performance agribusinesses that we present to a wide range of